The batteries have run out in the lavalier, in the wireless mic, so I'm going to stand because I'm using the one in the computer monitor. But Google had a product that I don't think really caught fire, but they called it Google Glasses, where you know, I mean, imagine you're walking down the street and you're wearing a pair of glasses that, you know, that display on a screen what's going around you, but also give you, you know, what's going on in a mini computer, so that you're not really looking directly at anything you see, but what you're seeing is basically a picture on the Google Glasses, and that's the immediate object of perception, as we say in philosophy. That's the immediate thing you see. If you can keep that in mind, let me lights, at least maybe a little easier. If you can keep that image in mind, you can understand what's going on with Locke's technical use of the word idea. For Locke, our mind never is acquainted directly with the external world. In other words, our belief that when we look at this book bag, we're directly seeing the book bag, the public object, in a public space. For Locke, that's wrong. That's the opinion of the ordinary man or woman on the street, but they don't understand that what the mind really sees immediately is only its ideas. An idea for Locke is an immediate object of perception. It's what the mind immediately is acquainted with. In other words, if you were wearing Google Glasses, it would be the picture you get from the glasses as what you immediately perceive. And so he extends the meaning of the word far beyond the way it's normally used in our time or in Locke's time, and he understands that. He understands that he's using idea as a technical term for the immediate object of perception, for what our minds are immediately acquainted with. And again, this seems like a picayune little detailed distinction. What has this got to do with my life? Well, you know what? If these guys are right, this view leads right down the garden path to skepticism. You know, and now it's not my own view. As I said, I was writing my dissertation on a Scottish philosopher named Thomas Reid, who, while Hume was still alive, criticized this view. It was called the theory of ideas. But you got to understand that the meaning of idea here is a special one that Locke gives it. It's not a dictionary definition. Dictionary definitions reflect how people use words, but then you have what are called stipulative definitions, where you just stipulate how you're going to use a word, and that's what Locke's doing here. And this is often done in philosophy and in other subjects. So how does he define it? This is his own language. Remember, the essay concerning human understanding was written in English, right? In the King's English here. It's so this is not a translation. These are the actual words that John Locke put down on the paper. An idea is whatsoever is the object of the understanding when a man, here, man in the generic sense, when a man thinks. In other words, whatever we experience is an idea. And he says that in the next section. It's whatever it is which the mind can be employed about in thinking. So, let me go. So for Locke, there are ideas or any kind of thoughts or experiences that could be in our minds. So when we use the word idea, we use it for something abstract, right, that can usually be expressed in language or in mathematical symbols, right? The abstract concept that 2 + 2 = 4 is an idea. But note, for Locke, it also includes our sensations. In other words, if this were spring and we'd be smelling spring flowers out there, it would be the actual smell of those flowers. Or what I get from my vision. In other words, if I saw a bird flying, that would be an idea. It also includes what he calls ideas of reflection. In other words, experiences that I'm having from sensations inside of me, like a pain. I still get a pain in my shoulder from an old motorcycle injury. When I was younger and dumber as a 17-year-old. Hint, don't go racing through San Martin Drive on a motorcycle. San Martin Drive is a road by Johns Hopkins that goes like this. I mean, it snakes through there. A lot of very hairpin turns. Anyway, so if I'm feeling a slight pain, that for Locke would be an idea. Or I'm feeling warmth from the sun, that's an idea. It also includes memory impressions. If I think back to, a memory of what my first girlfriend in high school looked like, or something like that, that also would be an idea. Now, he says we get our ideas from two different sources. From what our senses tell us, he calls these ideas of sensation. And I know this, you don't need to remember all the detail here, but, just remember the broad category. But we're going to spend more of our time on ideas of sensation than the other category. So they concern the qualities we see by our senses. Colors like yellow and white. Sensations like heat and cold, whether something is soft or hard or square. But he also says we get ideas from what's going on inside of us. And here we have Descartes' view that the mind is like a little immaterial machine, whereas our body has processes going on in it, right? Elimination of waste, circulation of blood, converting, oxygen, and stuff like that. So here we have a list of the ideas we can reflect on what's going on in our minds, and we see that our minds are capable of various operations. you know. So these are like immaterial operations in an immaterial space, the mind, for Locke as well as for Descartes. So perceiving something, then, you know, doubting, believing, reasoning, knowing, willing, all we know from reflecting on the operations that go on in our own minds for Locke. Well, okay. Now, our ideas are of two kinds. So, in the next few slides, a lot of little distinctions. You may have to go over them again to see, but they are simple and they're complex. And basically, the complex ideas are composed of the simple ideas. So, for ideas of sensation, this is in the next couple of slides, I illustrate the difference. Suppose you're looking at a telephone in front of you, you know, an old-fashioned telephone. I was talking with one of my backgammon players. This is a guy who teaches high school, right? I mean, he's an educated man, but he does not use computers at all. And he said, you know what? In my home, I still have an old rotary dial telephone that some people don't even know how to use when they come to it. Well, you know, this was when I updated my parents' old phones in the home I grew up in. We turned in the rotary dials and we got something like this, and this push button, where there's a touchstone pad. But suppose you're looking at a red telephone. The total idea you get of the telephone is a complex idea for Locke, but it's composed of the simple ideas of the qualities that go to make up the telephone, what we call a telephone. In other words, the simple ideas that complex idea is composed of are things like the red color of the telephone, the fact that it has a kind of a squarish shape. If we touched it, it might be cool and hard to our touch. You know, if we touch the case of the telephone. The telephone has a particular size, right? And we perceive it as having a particular size. If we lifted it up, it would have weight, and if it rang, sound. So all of these qualities are the separate properties that go to make up our experience of the telephone. Now, to dig down even further into little distinctions, and this is not a distinction that Locke invented, but it's kind of like John Locke put it on the map, so to speak. He popularized this distinction, the distinction between primary and secondary properties. Now, here's where we start to get to the claim that not everything we see in the telephone is really a property of the telephone in the real world. Primary properties, also called primary qualities, for Locke, are properties that things have in the real world separate from our perceiving them. In other words, that blackboard across the room is rectangular in shape, right? Shape for Locke is a primary property. And when you and I go home for the weekend, that blackboard is still going to be just as rectangular as it is now. Size is a primary property. It's not going to change the size when you and I walk out of the room. It's going to stay there all weekend, just the size we think it has. Right? So we'll see things like size and shape, feelings of hardness. He's going to claim that these are primary properties, and they're really in things. And while we can perceive these properties, the properties themselves really exist in things out there in the real world. Locke is a realist. He thinks we live in a real world. You know, if John Locke were here, he'd say, yeah, look, all these desks you're sitting on are real desks. You have real human bodies, you know. We're in a real material building on the 3rd floor. And for Locke, these desks are going to be here all weekend with the properties they have. The top of this table is going to still be rectangular when we go away for the weekend. Now, it may seem weird that I would have to point that out. But the point is, for Locke, and we'll see for Berkeley, not every quality of a thing is really in a thing. For Locke, that blackboard, the color of that blackboard, is not really in the blackboard as it exists in the world. It is subjective, and in us, that is black rather than some other color is something that is subjective. And I'm going to say more about that. So he says there are qualities which are caused in us by the operation of molecules. Remember, Locke knows Newton. He knows about the kind of stuff you learn in chemistry and or physics, right? That things are composed of molecules. He knows that they cause sensations in us, light hitting it. So the primary qualities produce sensations in us, but these are subjective, these secondary properties. They're not really in things, they're dependent on our minds. In other words, for there to be a black color in that blackboard depends on a mind perceiving it as such. For those plastic parts of your chairs to be blue, the color blue depends on a perceiving mind being there to experience the desk. But the desk as it is does not have a color associated with it as a property of the desk. So colors, tastes, smells, feelings of heat and cold, sounds, all these are subjective for Locke. And here's one of the arguments he uses. When I was a kid, and the hill is still there, but it's overgrown with bigger trees. In front of my house, there was a lot and a hill going down to Rowan Avenue. And there weren't things, there was just grass growing on it when I was growing up. It's overgrown with a lot of brush and stuff, you know. But we used to sled down it, you know, when we get a couple inches of snow. So my brother and I would be out there sledding on our little sleds. And our parents used to always buy us these little gloves that are just knitted, right? So they get wet and they don't really keep your hands very warm because they get wet and your hands get cold. So I'd come in, like my mother would call us in, you know, for dinner. We'd be sledding out there. And I remember we had an old sink with a separate hot and cold water faucets. And the cold was the easiest one to reach to wash up for dinner. So I turned on the cold when my hands were still really cold from being out there in the snow and wearing these ineffective long gloves. And the cold water felt warm because my hands were so cold. Well, this is kind of the phenomenon Locke's trying to call our attention to in this little experiment. Suppose we had hot water, not so hot that you can't put your hand in it, but definitely hot, like bath water or something. And here we had really cold water. Maybe we got some ice cubes floating in it. And in the middle we have kind of room temperature water or lukewarm water, right? So suppose you put one hand in the hot water, one hand in the cold water, and you let them be there for a couple of minutes. Now, if you took the hand out of the hot water and put it into the room temperature lukewarm water, how's this water going to feel to that hand? Cold. Yeah, it's going to feel cold because you just had it in hot water. But now, suppose you took the hand that was in the cold water with ice cubes in it and stuff, and put it in this lukewarm or room temperature water. How is that hand going to feel? Yeah, it's going to feel warm, just like my hands did when I put it over under the cold water spigot, because they were so cold from sledding out there, right? So what's Locke getting at? Well, you could say, well, wait a second. This hand felt cold. You know, the water here felt cold to this hand, and warm or hot to this hand. You could say, well, wait a second. The same water can't be both warm, can't be both hot and cold at the same time. It can't have these two opposite properties. How do we get out of the contradiction of saying the same water has two opposite properties at the same time? Well, for Locke, the way we get out of it is to say, well, heat and cold aren't really properties of the water. They're just subjective and in us. And whether this water is hot or cold depends on how we experience it. So he argues that things like feelings of hot and cold are secondary properties, not really in things. So here I describe the experiment with when both hands are then placed in the tepid water, the lukewarm water. The right hand feels cold, the left hand feels warm. We must either conclude that the same water is both hot and cold at the same time, or conclude that heat and cold are not in the water as properties of it, but are mind-dependent. Now keep that word in mind. For something to be mind-dependent and subjective means that it can't exist unless it's perceived by a mind. So for Locke, feelings of hot and cold don't just happen. They, they're dependent on a mind being there to feel something that's hot or cold. And colors are the same way. Now, well, before I get to primary qualities, I am not colorblind. I mean, not a metaphorical meaning, right? But the literal meaning of it. You know, in other words, like my birthday in March, I got to renew my driver's license, right? I'm gonna go to the MBA, and they're going to stick me in front of this eye thing, not only to test whether I got 20/20 or less vision, but also they'll give me a color blindness test. And if I were colorblind, there are some things that I would not make out on that test. Usually they bury words in other colors in such a way that somebody who's colorblind won't see the words, but somebody who's not can. And well, my dad grew up and he was colorblind. He used to only shoot photographs. Photography was his hobby in black and white film. It was also easier for him to develop that because he developed his own film. So here's the thing. If we talk about the subjective experience we have, it would have been very different for my dad looking through the MVA's goggles at the color blindness test than for me. When we come up to a traffic light, how does my dad know whether the light is green or red? How does somebody who's colorblind know that? Now, most women are not. I think it's more prevalent in men than women. Well, even if you're colorblind, you can tell which light is lit up. And green's always at the bottom, amber's always in the middle, and red's always at the top. I believe that's how it goes. He could tell by the position of the light. He could see which light was lit up, but not its color. So think about this. Isn't that an argument for saying, well, color's not really in the light, but it's subjective and in us, and I have a different experience of the color of the light than my dad does. By the way, when I was growing up, not everybody had a colored television. You know, nowadays, the only way you're going to buy something that's not a colored television is to go to some yard sale or flea market. But not everybody could afford a colored television back then. And for my dad, who was the breadwinner, in other words, if we had a television, it was going to be one that he bought for us in our home. There was no advantage to having a colored television. My parents did not get a colored television until my brother and sister-in-law got married, and they were making some money, and they bought them one for Christmas. You know, but so it kind of worked against us, right? Dad would always buy black and white televisions because it didn't matter to him. So what's going on here? Well, Locke is going to claim there are some properties things really have as they are in the world, but some properties just that our minds contribute. But he says, rather, even though the secondary properties are subjective, there's a real world out there that really has primary properties. These would include, as I said a few minutes ago, the size of something, its shape, right? In other words, as, to repeat what I said, as that blackboard is in the real world, it really has the size it has for Locke, because size is a primary property, and it really has the square shape, not square, but rectangular shape. And things like molecular texture, motion. Our eyes, now here's an important point to remember. This is how you can say, well, how do I know anything about the world if the only thing I perceive is my image of the world, my ideas? Well, think about it. has anyone met the president in person? No, and yet we all believe we know what President Obama looks like, right? I was looking for the hearings on the internet last night when I was had some spare time, because Thursday's my marathon day at Essex, so I usually have a little spare time in the afternoons. You know, I knew that I knew what Hillary Clinton looked like. Why? I've never met her in person. Probably never will. But then again, she's never met me. But yet I know what she looks like. Why? Because I've seen many images of her. We've seen many images of the president. So for Locke, how do we know anything about the world if we never experience it directly? Well, he says, look, our ideas resemble and represent those things. In other words, my inner idea that I'm looking at a rectangular blackboard over there resembles the real blackboard as it is in the real world, at least in terms of its shape and its size. You know, so it's like we never experience the world directly, but our mind has representative images in it, ideas that give me knowledge of the world, right? I mean, we've never sent a man or a woman to Mars yet, right? Yet we think we know a lot about it. Why? Because we've sent probes there to take representative images, to take photographs, send back video. You know, I think you can go on the internet right now and see what's going on with one of the Mars rovers. So we can get knowledge of what's going on from representative images, right? And so you say, well, okay, so what's the whole point in talking about this? Well, in order to understand Berkeley and Hume, especially Berkeley, let's review something. If we first experience only our ideas of the property of something, what is a telephone? What we experience as a telephone is just a combination of all of that telephone's properties, of its primary and secondary properties, but some are objective and really in the telephone, and some are subjective. Not all properties are really an object. For Locke, then, the red color of the telephone is not really in the telephone as a property. Right? If my dad looked at that photo, and he's no longer around, he probably wouldn't see the red color. Right? These are subjective for Locke. It is produced in our minds when we look at it by the motion of its molecules, which is a primary property, but the size and the shape of the telephone are really in it. In other words, Locke would say, I'm getting accurate information, even though I'm not experiencing this, briefcase directly, but only my ideas of it. I'm getting accurate information about the shape of this briefcase in the real world, its weight, its size, its number. In other words, that there's only one here, not two or three. Because all those are primary properties, even though the black color of the briefcase is subjective and in me. The fact that it feels a little cool to the touch, that's also subjective. you know, to somebody else it might not feel cool. Uh-huh.
So, I was doing a reading, and I was reading all of this. How do we acquire the idea that, if according to him, how do you acquire the idea that that is a rectangle? How do you and I agree that that is a rectangle, and how do you and I agree that that is flat if what we're seeing is not there really in the first place? It's not projected. So he says if you come here and you have to learn everything, then how do you learn anything if everything is abstract?
Yeah, you would have gotten along well with the 20th century philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, who made an argument much along the lines of what you're saying. It was called the private language argument, where Wittgenstein said, well, imagine that I'm on the inside the way people like Locke, Berkeley, and Hume say I am. How would I ever develop a language? You know, how would I keep track of what these sensations are so that I recognize red the next time? Or it's a fact of Cartesian, this is called Cartesian privacy. Because see, Descartes put us on the inside. As I think I said before, it's called being in the egocentric predicament. The mind is in the center, and all it's immediately acquainted with are its own ideas. But you're right, you say, well, you got a green bottle sitting on your desk. Well, how do we know that what you subjectively experience as green isn't what I subjectively experience as pink? Except every time we see that bottle, we give it the same label, green, only, you're experiencing one color subjectively, I'm having a different experience, but we always label it green. And how do you see, what I'm saying is that's a genuine problem. Right. For if you want to say we have the level of privacy and subjectivity that these philosophers say we have, then how do we know that we don't have different internal experiences of what we call a color?
Well, another question is, do we all need to get high and use what they were using to come up with the same ideas?
Well, see, that's the interesting thing about it. These guys aren't high. They aren't mad. In other words, Berkeley, when he's going to try to convince us that there's no such thing as the material world, isn't high on something. In fact, he's a bishop in the Church of Ireland later in his life. He wrote his best stuff when he was young, in his early 20s.
So I need to go back to being 20 for this to make sense?
No. What I'm saying is, these, it's significant that these philosophers were not on something. They weren't insane or mad. The point is, if you start out with a rational basis that Descartes gives us, that the mind is on the inside and it only has direct experience of its own inner mental life, then it becomes very hard, logically, in a cool, rational, logical way, to reason yourself to the claim that you really know something about an external world. We saw Descartes had that problem. He tries to get out of it. The empiricists have that problem, as it were, in spades, because they can't even claim they have any knowledge like Descartes could. And so, the point is, what I'm trying to say is what seems to be absurd views. In other words, Thomas Reid was the founder of the Scottish Common Sense School, and he says, look, the views these guys are holding just shocks the common sense of the average person, right? When I tell you, oh, there's no heat in fire, it's all you. There's no cold in the water or heat in the water. I mean, that's not what the average person believes, right? You believe that ginger ale was cold, and that cold is a property of the ginger ale, not just something subjective and in you. That the real bottle of ginger ale in the real world is cold. Now, it might be lukewarm now, since it's been sitting there, but you know what I mean. So it's significant that what seems to be views that run counter to our common sense experience of the world fall out logically when you put us on the inside experiencing only our inner sensations. In other words, really, one view of what David Hume was doing in arriving at very skeptical positions on everything, the existence of ourselves continuously, the existence of the external world, the subject, the quality of morality, he says it's all subjective in the matter of feelings. All of that, one way of looking at what Hume was doing is he was just following out to their logical extreme the consequences of the assumptions these guys were working with from Descartes on. In other words, they don't have to be insane or on something. These, what seem to be very much against common sense, beliefs they had, philosophical positions, just fall out rationally and logically from the place they start with, and so, of course, Berkeley in his older age, started writing books that were not as good as he wrote a book called Alciphron, where he spent a long time defending the medicinal properties of tar water. By the way, it does have some properties. There was a particular dandruff shampoo that was really nasty stuff. And it's kind of black and it's still on the market. But if you look at the ingredients, it's tar. It's one of the ingredients. That's why the shampoo is black. So anyway, okay, we didn't get as far as I was, but that's okay. I'm glad to have people, interact here. But see, that's what's significant about this thing, that these guys aren't insane, and yet they're coming up with philosophical views that, we may as well say, well, you may as well be on something if that's what you think. So, we'll kind of pick this up. Again, I'm going to at least try to get your take-home essay questions. Now, I'm going to have a printout of them for you on Monday, right? We'll have a review session either Wednesday or Friday. But I'm going to try to get up not only the take-home essay questions, but maybe even the review sheet. We'll make it through most of British empiricism, or at least through Berkeley. I may save Hume for the next test, so I'll put something on hopefully I get to the review session, but I will try to at least get your essay questions. So you'll actually have 2 weekends rather than 1 to work on your essay. Okay, have a great weekend. I mean, it's supposed to be beautiful weather, except a little possible rain, but not much. So take care. If anyone has the roll, bring it up, and if anyone missed it, there'll be there's a pen here. Just sign it on the way out.
Yes. Girl, is that